You won't find even one person in jail for a violent crime who had a great childhood. Are you serious? I mean, there are studies that show this. He didn't want to talk about his family. He made it clear that he wanted to stand on his own 2 feet, that he wanted to be a big deal in the movie business. And yeah, I'd go as far as to say maybe he even had a little chip on his shoulder. He was fiery. You don't seem very fiery to me. You seem like you get crazy. I get crazy. Okay. You don't want to set me off. Big blow-ups there. No, we both can get pretty. You don't roll easily either. No, we can both get pretty hot, and there were times when we did get hot. It's tough. So, you take a kid who's a teenager going through a tough time. No matter what, his brain is going through all kinds of changes and he's trying to establish himself and his identity. And then you mix in the drugs with it and it makes for a really bad cocktail. Yeah. I had no identity and I had no passions, and I think the reason I had no identity was because I have a famous dad and a famous grandpa, and they sort of, that fame sort of informs who you are. So I wanted to etch out my own identity with a more rebellious, angry, drug-addicted sort of a persona. Yeah, it was about 5, 6 years ago. I was in LA and we had coffee together. He had a project that he was trying to get up and running. He had struggled. He'd really struggled trying to find his footing in Hollywood. He co-wrote that movie that his dad produced, but nothing really since then. Love him. I love. Oh, I don't love him. You got plenty of cushions. Rehab or jail. Quite a wide selection there. One of us had to keep him safe. For him or for you. I can't stay here anymore. Okay. This place is like a prison. It's not even close. And so it wasn't a very pleasant meeting. And I remember walking away from it thinking the only thing that makes Nick interesting is the one thing he's trying to get away from, which was his family. It was a tricky meeting. He turned up late. I remember he didn't smell really very good at all. In fact, he smelled terrible. He looked really disheveled. He looked like he had just woken up. And he was annoyed. He got angry with the staff when they got his order wrong. I got nightmares in my head. I feel my mind feels like a creature. It haunts me so much. I got nightmares in my head. On the surface, the psychology of the Reiner murders is hard to understand. And usually in true crime, we try to explain the hard-to-understand stuff by turning the person who did it into a monster or crazy, or saying his actions came from being messed up by pills or drugs, or he's a psychopath. I think that's a mistake. Nick Reiner isn't taking pills because he doesn't feel anything, or because he's a psychopath, or because he's this empty person. Quite the opposite. Addicts aren't addicts because they don't feel any pain, but because they are overwhelmed by the pain they do feel. Their world seems to be a world of hurt, pain, and efforts to avoid and escape facing it, which naturally makes that pain so much worse and robs them of the little control they had before they started taking drugs. In this breakdown, I want to dig deep into the psychological puzzle of this case, which we can boil down to one question. Why did Nick Reiner hate his father? Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you're finding this breakdown helpful, please hit the thanks button and let's get started. So, first let's be clear. Many people have said this in fact, that Nick Reiner hated his father. In fact, within just a day or two of the murders, we saw headlines like this saying exactly that. Nick Reiner really resented Dad Rob. Hated himself for not being as talented, prolific, or beloved as his dad or granddad. And then this, I'm not going to quote that headline, but Nick has said that he didn't bond with his dad when he was young. Now, the Washington Post recently did a big story that confirmed and added to some of these feelings and seemed to show Nick's hatred for his parents isn't new. It was sort of there all along. It's even shown and talked about in Being Charlie, a movie father and son worked on together. The incident where Nick tossed a turkey leg at his father's plate on Thanksgiving in front of 20 guests is one example of many. The interesting thing is that Nick didn't resent his parents apparently for sending him to rehab either. So, what the heck was the problem? Nick wasn't abused or neglected and Rob was a loving father in some way. But the fact that we were dealing with, things that Nick had gone through and how I had related to it and how his mother had related to it, it forced me to have to see more clearly and understand more deeply what Nick had gone through. I think it's very clear that Rob and Michelle were loving parents. So what was the problem? Well, the answer lies in a single word: enmeshment. But the enmeshment we are dealing with here is subtle and I would say common but not the usual kind, which is what makes it so hard to spot at the end of the day. Let me explain, and let's start by defining enmeshment. Enmeshment is a messed up relationship pattern often in families. So there's also enmeshment outside families. It's marked by blurry emotional lines, too much dependency and a loss of being your own person. And then they talk about key parts of enmeshment. And there you have it. Lack of boundaries. And then they talk about loss of self. We'll get to that in a moment. Now, at first look, none of the usual ideas about enmeshment really fit here. None of them seem to apply to the Reiner case. But let's look specifically at key reasons for father-son fights. There is being too bossy and controlling. Is that what we're dealing with here? I don't think so. If anything, we know that Nick Reiner's parents were the opposite of strict, that they didn't set boundaries. Then emotional distance and ignoring him, lack of love, lack of interest, not really fitting. High expectations and putting him down, that might be a bit relevant, but I don't really think it's the main thing. Generational differences and arguments, copying bad behavior like fathers who lose their temper fast, not consistent with rules. I don't think we're dealing with that either. One-sided stories. And then this is the key one: the need to become your own person. Teens and young guys may push against their fathers as a way to figure out who they are and build their own independent manhood. And what I think is interesting here is it's not like Rob was blocking his son or putting him down or holding him back. If anything, that project being Charlie was trying to help Nick get where he needed to go. And I think more the issue was Rob Reiner's huge success and reputation was this giant thing that sort of covered Nick and Nick couldn't get out from under it. And I think a lot of that was in his own head. And of course, if you're going to take drugs, that's not going to be the best way to define yourself or even build an identity. And have a look at this headline from Rolling Stone. Nick Reiner and the weight of a famous name in the Dobie podcast. David Mannheim reflects on his friend's struggle with the burden of legacy. Right. His father's legacy. Sometimes to see what something really is, we need to look at something else. Sometimes the truth is just too bright. It hurts, burns, or blinds us. So let's look away for a second from the Reiner case and think about an example from something made up. Fiction is safe but often a good way to talk about hard or upsetting questions, thoughts, or ideas in a safe space. So here's the example. There's a scene in Season 3 Episode 1 of Stranger Things where Hopper tries to handle Mike getting close with Eleven. And even though he tells his friend Joyce how the closeness between the teens is driving him nuts. If you order them around like a cop, then they're going to rebel. It's just what they do. So what? I'm just supposed to let them do whatever they want. You can actually see how the parent side of this problem has a bunch of issues and hard parts. But the kid side does too. If you want to become who you are, is it going to upset somebody? Well, I mean, they're just kissing, right? Yeah, but it is constant. It is constant. And that's from about 20 minutes into Episode 1. You can see Hopper is fighting his urge to take over the situation, to control it, and to control Mike especially. Things blow up when the two teens are making out again and Hopper has been practicing nice things that he and Joyce wrote down. Then finally Hopper tries to talk to them the right way, but he feels embarrassed, disrespected, and powerless doing it. And he kind of is. And so in the end, he angrily tells Mike to get in his car, locks the door, throws away Joyce's notes, and yells at Mike. Predictably, Mike yells at Hopper, "I hate you. I hate you. What I wanted to say to you is that I think we're in trouble." I mean, the look on Hopper's face here really is priceless. Are you lying, piece of, __, well, I'm not actually sure if Mike does yell at Hopper, "I hate you. I hate you." But you can tell that he has very strong bad feelings, right? And so what is going on here is Mike growing up from a little boy into his own person, and at the same time Hopper as a dad figure is losing some power as his kid looks for love, attention, and control. Where else? Hopper is kind of becoming less important in this setup. And so there's a natural push from all three people here to get back their power or claim their power. Hopper from Mike, Mike from Hopper, and 11 with Mike. And so, how does this power fight end? Well, sometimes it doesn't, but Stranger Things, you'll have to watch it, shows a way where Mike finally proves himself and Hopper accepts he can't control Mike forever. That doesn't usually happen so easily or fast in real life. Sometimes that fight lasts a lifetime. Now, I have to say normally I get a gut feeling in a lot of the crime cases I talk about. And although the drug story has always made sense to me in this case, the mind stuff in this case didn't really click. It's easy to blame it all on drugs. But when you do that, that pretends there's no deeper mind stuff to handle in this case. And as empty as drug addicts seem, there is always some mind stuff underneath. There always is. How often do you find yourself having the same sort of funny a style as your father? Well, I try to be funny whenever I can, but I don't really know. I don't know what that meant. Well, in this area, I thought that I had a sort of blank moment in this case. Nothing clicked. Nothing mind-wise really made sense. Calling Nick names, saying he was selfish and a spoiled brat, all made sense in a surface way, but it didn't hit the real heart of the problem. Even this idea of Nick being jealous or envious of his father didn't quite get to the core. I mean, at the end of the day, what is going to make someone so mad they want to kill? And I think some things were annoying, like people being nice to Nick just to get close to his dad. You know, according to Rolling Stone, he realized that so many of his talks with people were just deals, people wanting to get to his dad. But rather than using that and maybe rising above it or starting from there, Nick felt unsafe and scared by it. And I think he had reason to feel that because he was basically a nobody. He wasn't really working hard to become someone. And in that way, he was actually trying to use the family name. But there is something deep and basic about murder. People always think about it as real, but there's a real symbol thing going on. You can feel threatened in a symbol way. Your sense of who you are isn't a real object. It's something you build in your mind. And so if your sense of self is under attack, it's a symbol attack. And so when it comes to people who live mostly in their heads, it's way easier to threaten their sense of self because that's all they've got. And so murder is sometimes a kind of self-defense. Not real defense of course, but in a way that the made-up self feels or maybe is really under attack. Murder seems like a simple fix for that. Except, of course, in real life, when you look at it clearly, murder isn't a fix at all. But what exactly is the problem? And how is the problem so stuck, so painful, so awful that the only way out for Nick seemed to be murder? I mean, how does this show up in a messed up mind that's thinking about it? What is the trouble? What is the root of this thing? And I have to say, it clicked for me a few days ago when I was talking about the JonBenet Ramsey case. And I came across a woman who worked for John Ramsey's company, Jane Stoy, and she described Patsy's relationship with her mother as enmeshed. And of course, that's what JonBenet's relationship was like with her mother too. And I also noticed that there was a lot of enmeshment between the daughters and Nedra. I believe that Nedra called a lot of the shots. And I old lady for the grandma. Well, I think that we all have a public side and then there's another side people have, and my experience was that there was another side to these folks, and when you have enmeshment this can cause problems with the son and his relationships with other family members and even other people, and in this case with Nick Reiner, what was his relationship like with his mother and his sister, and of course this can get worse if the father is busy too. In any event, enmeshment in several true crime cases explains a lot. There's a lot of enmeshment with Brian Koberger with his mother and the trouble he had becoming his own person at college, especially with girls. And I suspect there was something similar in Amanda Knox's relationship with her mother. There's actually video of Knox and her mother meeting after the murder of Meredith Kircher, and they seem more like two schoolgirls catching up as if they're equals, chatting and laughing than mother and daughter handling a very serious situation. This enmeshment may also be why Knox and Kircher didn't get along well, because one was way ahead in becoming her own person when they lived together while the other wasn't. Does that make sense? Even just in a big picture idea. Now, in the next breakdown, I'm going to talk about the fix for enmeshment. If enmeshment is the problem, what is the fix? Does anyone know what that is? Well, here's a hint, and it comes from Elizabeth Smart's YouTube channel, Life. And part of me just kind of feels like living, like experiencing life is the best medicine or the best healing. Like I think if you sit in a room and dwell on the past, dwell on like the terrible things of life, I think it gets harder to live that way. And isn't that exactly what Nick Reiner was doing? He was just stuck in this guest house and he wasn't really living. And then I think he started in his mind blaming his parents for his life situation. And really it wasn't them who was to blame. You know, he needed to just go out and experience life, right? In any event, this has been quite a deep breakdown. I'm not going to go further than that, but if you do want to hear about the fix for enmeshment, let me know in the comments. If you liked this video, you're more than welcome to hit the thanks button. Otherwise, enjoy your weekend and I'll see you guys next time.